This is Anish Chauhan and this is Equilibrium Security. It's time to tackle your biggest cyber security challenges head on. Hello, everybody, and thank you. Welcome to the Cyber Hot Seat, episode 25. Super impressed and pleased that we're at this point now during Cyber Hot Seat episodes. So today we're talking about something I'm really super interested in, and I think keeping it all contained into 45 minutes or an hour, whatever we end up talking about, is going to be the challenge, I think. But it's a following on from a recent podcast we did before, talking about red teaming. This specific episode is called Continuous Adversary Emulation, Security that Thinks Like an Attacker. And to join me in this conversation is Warren Butterworth. He's one of our lead testers at Omni and also a red team specialist. So thanks, Warren, for joining on this episode.
Yeah, no problem. Nice
I think we've
here.
actually dragged you away from an actual red team engagement right now.
I am currently on an occasion. Yes.
So yeah, thanks. Look, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Actually, it's one we've been talking about for quite a while. So let's start with the title and what we talk about. So when you hear the phrase, or when we talk about continuous adversary emulation, because there's a distinction between emulation and simulation, and I know I've got it wrong once or twice. So what does it mean in practice? What does that term mean? Because it's becoming more and more relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, so emulation, simulation, they do get mixed up, and I guess people do get them wrong. Emulation, we're really emulating a specific threat. So a specific threat actor out there, cyber criminal, whatever it be.
Yeah.
And we're specifically attacking, let's just say, the client or the victim, with their specific TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, specifically to that threat actor. Can often be quite narrow in scope because we don't deviate really away from those TTPs. And then obviously simulation is more like it's like a hypothetical threat. We do use TTPs, but often they're not the necessary TTPs that some threat actor will use. They could just be a range of TTPs that everybody or attackers are using within the threat landscape. Obviously, and it can be quite broad in scope. Again, let's just say one attacker would do social engineering, like phone call and social engineering. That's specific, emulate that threat. But simulation, it might just be, we'll just get in a different type of scenario, social engineering way. So
So when we think about some of the high profile breaches, the threat actors that compromise those, the likes of M&S, etc. That was a specific attacker group, wasn't it? And they have a preference to attacking organisations in a specific way, don't they? What is it worth just quickly touching on that?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously you've got quite a lot of different threat actors out there, and there is hundreds. Specifically, we could talk about people like, Scattered Spider. They're English speaking. So in regards to some of their attacks, they would potentially phone up and do phishing attacks. And phishing, you can say it in a multiple types of way. You don't really know what it is, but phone call phishing. And phoning up and resetting credentials, help desk, try and get someone's account reset and that sort of thing. But you wouldn't get that with another type of threat actor, Cozy Bear or something, because they're not English speaking, so they potentially wouldn't do that. They would do it a different way. So again, there's so many different threat actors, hacktivists, cyber criminals, nation state. There's so many different types of attacks, and each one, they all have their own TTPs,
their own preference. Cool. And then so a lot of and this is kind of the one real crux of this conversation, really. A lot of organizations feel reassured when they've had a pen test, and we're talking about a conventional pen test here, the scope based. You and I, Warren, we spoke about this a few times about one being scope based and one being objective based, etc. But why just is it less worth talking about why does a pen test give that kind of false sense of security?
Yeah, so obviously a pen test, if you think about it, and there's a great analogy I like to use, for this, but obviously a pen test is a point in time. So let's just say it's booked in for a certain period of time, and we're going to look at everything that's in scope, and that's really important, in scope. we're doing a test on a specific day or specific week, specific month, or maybe after infrastructure changes, and we test it. And let's just say it's a clean report. Let's just say there really isn't anything on there. Just having a clean report doesn't mean you're unhackable. Like I say, I like to use the MOT analogy. You could go get your car tested today. It's absolutely fine. It's roadworthy, but tomorrow the wheel falls off. Because there's something that's happened. And so vulnerabilities come out every day. The pace of attacks are changing, even with things like AI now. And then obviously the scope as well, so we're talking about a pen test. It might just be web application pen test. We're looking at your exposed web applications. There's no pivot in, if you get any access. We're not looking at your infrastructure. We're not looking at anything else that's exposed, across that business. So it's purely a point in time check. And I think people do that just because a real attacker doesn't really adhere to scope. So they look for the weakest path. They look for the point they go in, and that might be a web app, but it could easily just be cred stuff in attack. Found some creds on there, and we'll blast it or something else. So yeah, that's probably the thing I think people need to look at.
Yeah, and I think is it to some degree has penetration testing it's become commoditized. It's driven by regulation to a lot of degree, and I think the world has moved on so much in since we started penetration testing to now that the testing hasn't caught up necessarily with the world, apart from things like perhaps DORA that are specifically talking around doing realistic attacks. There's not too much regulatory driving towards having your attack or testing being realistic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Pen testing is not a bad thing. You should be doing pen testing.
Still needed, isn't it? Yeah, that's an important thing to say. Yeah,
you definitely need to be doing it. I guess, it has changed quite a bit, and I do think there is scope, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit about it later as well. But there's definitely scope to do different testing now. Even red teams to a point, there are a point in time, often, we do a lot of red teams and it's often the same couple of months every year. It's done on a regular basis. Everybody in the business knows it's getting done, so they're all on high alert. They roughly know it's in September, October, so the team are like, oh, it's going to happen soon. They start seeing some activity and they're like, oh, it's the red team. So it's all eyes on. But that's just definitely not how real adversaries work.
No.
365 days a year, which takes us back to the first question, continuous adversary emulation. What is it? And it is that testing around 2 a.m. in the morning, trying to get access, whereas a pen test, you're not going to do that. Saturday, Sunday, access, whereas you're not going to do that on a pen test.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions, aren't there, really, about how attackers actually operate. And I think you've just touched on it, and you've teed me up perfectly for the next question. But what's the biggest misconception that organizations have about how attackers actually operate? Because we probably all think about, or certainly people in decision-making roles who might not be super familiar with approach these that cyber criminals take. What, in your opinion, your experience, is the biggest misconception about threat groups and attacker groups?
I guess there's a lot of ways attackers can get in and have got in, and I think a lot of people now think they send the phishing email, an employee clicks on the link, ransomware is deployed. And that still does happen to a certain point, but it's massively shifted now. Attackers are leaning on trusted ways of getting in. And when I say trusted ways of getting in, they're not going in through the front door of the business. They're abusing the supply chain. I always like to say, attackers aren't sort of forcing their way in. They're logging through methods that the organization already probably trusts. Let's just say, Azure or Microsoft or some sort of supply chain, a trusted way to gain access. So I think people think that it's just a standard click, fish, payload, but with things like, EDR now, a lot of people think, oh, I'm protected against that. I'm protected against that. Well, let's just lean on things that are trusted. Let's just abuse things that are already out there. So, there's something I always say, like, why break through the front door when you can steal the cleaner's key and get in?
That's right. Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good analogy, actually. I haven't heard that one before.
So, well, SolarWinds, for example, do you know what I mean? It's exact.
Great example.
They trust vendor updates and stuff like that. So it's a really key way for attackers to get in. So
yeah. Okay. Cool. And then let's think about kind of attacker thinking then. So you, as part of your activity and the team and things that we do as for the continuous emulation, you're emulating a real threat actor. How like, for the listener's perspective, how do you start? Are you researching on, like, how do you emulate an attacker, basically?
So obviously, I guess a lot of my time, I generally always do red teaming. I look in a lot of threat intelligence, a lot of threat feeds. So I sort of have a finger on the pulse a little bit as to what's going on. But when it comes to an engagement with a client, before we really think about the attacker, we think about the client first, because most of the time we're not just emulating the threat attack to attack anybody. We're actually specifically working with a client. So we need to understand the client. We need to understand the organization. Because let's just think about it. A threat actor wants to attack a business. The first thing they're going to do is to pick a business of where they want to go. Who are they? What industry are they in? What's the valuable target to go after? So we start to look at things like that and start to build up a picture of the organization, their geographic footprint. Are they just in the UK? Are they Europe? Are they global? What sort of technology are they using? Do they have like cloud infrastructure? What things are exposed? So try get an idea. And then once we get an idea of who they are and what industry they're in, then we can start looking at threat actors that are likely to target that organization. So we can start to say, this would be more like a cyber criminal potentially, because they want to get in there and they want a ransomware, and then they want to just get some, have some money, so that sort of thing. And then so we start to put those two pieces together, and then once we've sort of got those two pieces, then we start to look at, so what are the TTPs that this target threat actor would actually use against this target, and then we start to put together sort of almost like what we type is, it's like a not a kill chain, but like a chain of events that we need to sort of mimic and sort of replicate against that. And there might be quite a few, might not just be one. So we might be like, we need to target their external web apps, because that's generally how people have got in. So there's some of the things we sort of think about, and we sort of try to put it all together and really think about how a genuine attacker would attack that business.
That's really interesting, actually, because when we think about emulation, you think, okay, well, we're going to start with the threat actor, but actually that's not part of the emulation. Starts with understanding the target first of all, doesn't it? Really, actually,
100%.
That's really interesting. And then how about, you mentioned sort of like an attack path, or you mentioned kill chain, sorry, but what's an example of an attack path that a fairly standard security assessment might miss, but a real attacker wouldn't? So how, like, if we just compare those two?
So obviously, depending on the type of security assessment, let's just say it's a penetration test. Obviously, pretty much every penetration test really is, like I say, it's very small in scope. It could be an internal, it could be external, it could be a web application. So let's just say we're just going to go after their web applications. But some of the things that you'll miss when you do that is everything else, like their identity provider potentially. You're not going to be looking at any sort of breaches, data breaches. One of my big things I always find on most engagements is credentials, credential abuse. So I could probably say, I mean, I mean, we've got listeners anyway, so I would say if they all had a thought about the password they use for one of their apps, let's just say one of their social media apps, I
Yep.
would say, I would probably say 99% that they use that same password over multiple different things. So
Really that
obviously,
high? Because I think
I
everybody in the
honestly
security
think so.
professional world thinks that absolutely not. We don't reuse any passwords. But if
That
everyone listening to
1%
this
is the
now,
security world.
okay, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So outside of that, then, but then you still think that it's really that high, is it? That there's
I
passwords are reused?
honestly, I
Yeah,
honestly do. We see it so much. We see
yeah,
it so much. We let's just say, um, we get on on someone's machine. We dump passwords or cookies saved in
yeah,
browsers, and you can just see the same password. Maybe with something changed at the end, an exclamation mark or a one or a
sure,
two or a
yeah,
2025 changed to a 2026. It is
right,
so common. So
still,
so so
yeah,
I guess from the perspective of the security assessment, anything social engineering, you're not really
yeah,
going to do for a pen test.
sure,
Attacker in the middle, MFA fatigue,
yeah,
supply chain attacks.
yeah,
Let's just say out of bounds social engineering, what I like to call really, like, let's just say, we're Teams, everyone's on
hmm,
Teams,
yeah,
but what happens if the people are on Slack? What if we send messages through Slack, and
yeah,
try to fish people? What if we go through LinkedIn and,
mm, yeah,
meet people on LinkedIn, build up that rapport, um, you know, have that conversation between them, say we want them
yeah,
to do some work for us. They need to sign an NDA. We send them the NDA, and
yeah,
before you know it, we've got credentials. So there's lots of things that are missing. There's just a standard pen test, and
yeah,
even like if you say, oh, let's do a social engineering engagement, but then
yeah.
you're just sort of limited to social engineering engagements, and
In
often that
time,
can
aren't
be,
you?
yeah,
Yeah,
you got a limited amount of time, and also a lot of social engineering, not all, but some, there's stuff that's out of scope.
mm.
Oh, don't touch the CTO, don't touch the
Which is probably
CEO.
the worst thing to put out of scope sometimes, isn't it?
Exactly, they're
Yeah.
probably going to be the ones that are going to click or the ones that
Mm.
are going to react to that message.
Yeah, because things like that NDA example you gave, or those contracts that you gave, that might go if it's a small kind of mid market organization, that might have to go to the CEO CTO to sign
Yep.
that, and therefore taking them out of scope is insane, really, because yeah, that's how we've been able to demonstrate a compromise of organizations in that way, because but you don't, you're not, there's not a defined channel for receiving things like those NDAs, and especially like commercial contracts and stuff. From a sales perspective, salespeople are super keen to get whatever signed and get whatever handed over, and before you know it, credentials have gone.
Yeah, exactly that. And also a lot of social engineering engagements, it's external social engineering engagements. It's like, okay, we got creds, we got MFA, FIDO downgrade or anything like that on
Yeah,
how we got in. And then some are limited, then, oh no, you can't go any further, you can't do anything else. Getting in is fine. Well, hang on, like, normal actor would get in,
would
and then once they're in, sit there, enumerate, and see
yeah,
where they can go, maybe look for VPN details, get on the
yeah,
VPN, and then, before you know it, they're on the network. Maybe do some internal phishing. Now I'm in an email account. What if I send the phishing onwards, from
from
that account?
that
Because now I'm
account.
in a trusted email. You know what I
Yes,
mean? So
yeah,
so that's fine. What about if I drop some files on SharePoint and
mm,
OneDrive? So there's a lot of things that are often sort of, let's just say, constrained in an engagement.
yeah,
Um, and it is that scope. An adversary really doesn't have a scope.
no,
The world's their oyster. They can go
mm,
wherever they want to go and do whatever they want to do. And I guess that's where adversary sort of emulation or simulation comes in, really.
yeah, and I think it kind of requires. I was speaking to a client about this yesterday, and that they do confined testing in a confined window, a set period of time, and they're it's almost like they've got to change their way of thinking of how testing is carried out, because they're saying, well, what happens if this happened? What happens if you took over? What was it? Would you when would you stop? And what well, we're like, and that's the point, isn't it? A threat actor wouldn't stop. An
Yeah.
actual, bad actor won't actually go, well, actually, I've gone too far. I need to stop, or actually, it's going to cause downtime. What happens if it cause outages? What happens if it cause? Well, you've got to see it as a real. It's not a test to tick a box, is it? It's a test to test your ability to respond to a realistic
Yeah, 100%.
emulation. Yeah,
The clients I've worked with a complete spectrum.
sure.
Obviously, the real paranoid and don't do anything to the ones that are completely open, and the ones that are completely open and let almost free reign, but you're not doing this, you're not causing any damage, but the ones that give you free reign, they get the most out of it. I worked with someone recently, and we were at the end of the engagement, it was like, how did you do this, how did you do that? And it was more purple team, and we went through everything that I did. And they were like, well, we didn't see it, we didn't spot it. Why didn't we spot it? And they're changing their EDR, they're refining it, and tweaking it, and then like do it again, and did it again, and we spotted it this time, or we can see it. I'm going to put alerts in for this. We work with them to do that.
That's the point, isn't it? Yeah, because like red teamers, of course, you all have a thirst for blood, but also it is collaborative to the point of saying, well, look, this is what happened. It happened yesterday. Or it happened, early this morning. Now you need to do something about your EDR, change something. So, and if we compare that to a conventional red team, sometimes you might not know until the end of the red team engagement, which might be 30 days later. So that's quite important, isn't it, for the continuous aspects?
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't have any conversations like this without talking about AI. So how has AI changed the way attackers, from the attacker's perspective, because everyone thinking about AI is probably thinking about how they're using it in their day-to-day lives at the moment, but how does it change how they conduct their reconnaissance and their social engineering?
Well, I'd say not just recon and social engineering. I would say everything really. Malware development, execution, social engineering massively, obviously. And obviously, like you say, recon, scraping huge amounts of data quickly, with AI is very easy to do. Analyzing sort of employees on LinkedIn, from a recon perspective, so that there's all of that. But social engineering, AI is massive now. You've got foreign foreign nationals that maybe wasn't English speaking, wasn't their first language, can now create brilliant CVs, fake companies, really well written phishing emails, that previously you used to spot
spelling mistakes because it's been translated by Google Translate from English from another language and back into English again, or
exactly. And then we can talk about the deep fakes. We've already seen that. You can probably just go on YouTube and have a quick Google. There's constant videos of people trying to spot fake interviews, AI fake deep fakes, so they're all that. But as I said, malware development as well, it's enabling people to build malware faster, so much faster than previously we would have generally seen. People need to sit there and code it, work out how to do something. Now with AI, it's made it a lot faster, which then obviously comes back to that point in time. Let's just say that point in time check. You do that point in time check, but by the time it comes around to next 12 months, there's so much malware that's come out. And there's so
12 months is an eternity, isn't it, in this day and age?
Yeah. So the speed and the scale, I guess, really, has massively increased. And AI is only going to keep getting better. We've obviously, I know Fable's sort of been pulled at the moment, but look, we've all got access to AIs, but so has everybody else got access to it. And then I guess another thing I'd say as well is the capability of attackers. We'd always used to say, you got script kiddies that didn't really know anything. They would literally just find some code and run it. They didn't really know what it did. But now script kiddies could be looking at that code, and it's increasing their skill very quickly. So you've now got more attackers potentially being able to fire things off, and it means script kiddies can operate at a much higher level, so which then increases the amount of attackers. So it's going to be massive. It really is, and it's not going to stop.
No,
I guess the best thing is we've got AI as defenders, if you want to call us defenders, attackers, white hats. But yeah, so has black hats.
So does the other side. Yeah. It's really important to think about that way. Okay, so you've seen loads of engagements. You've been on lots of, and we've got some great stories to tell. Some we probably can't say, but we could probably just spend an hour just of stories of red teams. But after all the ones that you've seen, what's kind of consistent, or either within an organization do they keep repeating, or across all of the tests that you've done that you see as consistent things? Because I know that people listening to this right now, if they've had a red team, or maybe only do it annually, or they haven't had a red team, they'll immediately be thinking, oh, what would happen in this scenario? How would we stand up this? What do you see kind of as a repeating pattern, I suppose?
Honestly, still probably one that's right up there is weak passwords.
Okay.
Still to this day.
Yeah.
And not necessarily just weak passwords, weak passwords, and then maybe let's just say internally the overprivileged accounts as well. So
Right. Okay.
not
Yeah.
only as have you got weak passwords, but this I can't count on my hands like how many domain admins passwords I've cracked, because they're so weak.
So weak.
So yeah, that is definitely one. I would say also, leaving passwords hanging around. I don't know who coined the term.
Do you mean physically, as in leaving them written down on a post-it? Is that what you mean?
No, written down in SharePoint or OneDrive.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
On a document, the amount of passwords, I found SQL access with SA accounts. I found domain admin accounts. I found standard user accounts, third-party accounts for people's social media, credit card companies, you name it. Some people think, I can't remember all my passwords. I'll stick them in a docx and I save it on my SharePoint, and then that SharePoint has access. Multiple people have access to that, and read teaming is what I call it. But I'm not going to coin that because I do know. I think that was Andy Gill's. He created that term. But so that they're definitely ones. I'd also say organisations don't really have visibility of what's going on. They have all the tooling, but they don't really know how to use it. And they don't really, we did this, and this, and it's all been done, and they got no idea how we even did it, or how they would spot it. We've got MDE, but there's so many alerts that they can't see the wood for the trees, if that makes sense. Sorry,
Warren. I was just going to say, sometimes there's so much tooling that's purchased, because they think that, to some degree, by a vendor, maybe I'm not going to rubbish anybody, but the vendor said this is a silver, they're not saying, using the word silver bullet, they are saying this will solve this security problem, and then so the organization spends six figures on it and thinks, okay, we've solved that problem about that, but without ever testing it, you just never know.
Yeah, exactly that. They buy all the tools, they deploy them, but the detections aren't tuned correctly, and then maybe even if they are, they're like, well, what happens, or what happens if we do that? What's our plan? How do we stop it? How do we stop somebody laterally moving? Do we isolate the machine? Or what if it's a machine that can't be isolated? So there's lots of things that people need to think about, and I guess that that's another thing I also see is the sort of segmentation as well in environments. Whether that be, being able to, if to say for an internal aspect, you get domain admin on an environment, but then those domain admins are also synced to the cloud, and they're also global admins. Well, suddenly then you just increase the blast radius, and now you're global admin in the cloud as well. So there's things like that people really.
So so when you think segregation, sometimes you're thinking about kind of like VLAN, like conventional network segregations, but that's really important to think of it in that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, also VLAN's the same. It makes it, if an attacker can laterally move inside really easy as well. That's something, it's very flat network. There's sort of some of the things I sort of see really on a daily basis.
And I guess you just sparked another thought in my mind about the kind of attack surface, because sometimes it's all things that organizations don't know about. Like we talked about a big well-known household retailer who predominantly operates online, but they we were discussing them recently, but they've taken all of their IT service provision from a massive global outsourcer and started to bring it in-house. And then suddenly they're realizing there's loads of stuff they don't know about, loads of cloud services they don't know about, loads of SaaS-based services they don't know about. And that kind of attack surface can really not knowing what's out there as well is a massive problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cloud environments, and I'm not going to say like they're misconfigured out of the box, but there is settings in there that you really should be turning off.
Yeah.
You sort of give people roles and permissions, in cloud environments, and maybe there's a knock-on effect to that, with conditional access policies, just to say, there's can be certain weak conditional access policies, we're only going to block people from these sort of countries, or we're going to stop people from accessing it with these sort of devices, where you can just change the sort of device that you're mimicking. You can also spin up virtual machines in other environments. You can use VPNs. There's so many different things as well. So I think a lot of people think, because there's all this tooling and stuff in this cloud environment, and there's all these settings and things that we can do, and it should just generally work. It's very quick to misconfigure it,
right. Yeah,
and leave yourself open.
Because you take the path of least resistance, don't you? You want the service up and running as quick as possible, so you can be operational as quick as possible, and effectively, do whatever it is you need to do. You might have already touched on this actually, and I think you did, but just let's dial into it a little bit more. When you talk about separating organisations who can spot the adversarial activity and those that can't, what's the factor? Because if some people were listening to this thinking, I reckon we would spot it. I reckon our organisation is sophisticated enough, our team is sophisticated enough, we have enough tooling, we've measured it. So I think we would, I think we'd be able to spot it. From your perspective, what separates the strong from the weak?
I did sort of cover it a little bit, but organizations that can detect attackers quickly, and they understand like what is happening across their environment, in real time. They sort of know exactly what's going on. What does abnormal look like, normal look like? And I think if those organizations that are focused on detection rather than just prevention, then that separates them out. Like I say, I've probably done two red teams or purple teams, or say back to back, and I did a chalk and cheese. One had no idea what was going on, and even if it did happen, they didn't spot it, and then the other one, it was just constant. Everything I was doing, it was spotted, even down to C2 traffic going in and out of the business. They could see everything and understand everything was going on and spot the abnormal, and that was really, really good. So and I guess organizations that continue to test their security controls is a really, really good organization. I think, let's just say, like I said before, just doing a pen test doesn't necessarily test your security controls. And like buying EDRs is great. They work and they are really, really good. And I'm not going to say that they're not, but you need to tune them right. You need to know what they do. You need to understand how they work. You need to know how to get the best out of them. So I guess there's a different mindset between those two organizations. So I think mature organizations were like, okay, attackers gonna get in, so when they do,
we need to be able
I then know what's going on. I think that's probably a good way to put it.
Trying not to focus just on the prevention, like you say, and trying to focus on the detection rather than that. Okay, cool. So I know we've spoken about AI already, we've mentioned that, but aside from that, or maybe you can use that as the main thing, but how do you see adversary emulation like evolving over the next few months, years, whatever time period, really?
I definitely think I'd like to say I think a lot of businesses are going to start thinking about it. I've always seen like a little bit of a shift myself. When I first started the industry, it was always pen test.
Sure.
There was the odd red team, but it was often pen test. And then social engineering started coming. I think my employees will click. But now I'm seeing a lot of let's assume breach, let's start from an assume breach position, let's go, right, we'll send you a laptop, we'll send you a real account, we'll send you someone's real laptop that's just left the business, or we want to do a purple team because, or we want to test those controls. We want to know if we will spot it. We want to know if our SOC's any good. Will our SOC just not do anything about it, So I do see, and because of the threat landscape evolving very quickly and the use of AI, I do think we'll see a lot more clients and organizations move into the adversary simulation, emulation, purple team, red team, even people that haven't been doing red team and moving into that red teaming space. We've already got, like you said, I mentioned earlier, we've already got DORA, threat-led penetration testing. We've got CBEST. Big financial institutions, are required to do that sort of testing now. That is threat-led penetration testing. That is, doing the threat intel piece, doing the red team piece based off that threat intelligence. Working with the client. We've already got those sort of regulations in place for certain organizations, so I do think it's going to get moved into a bigger space, and a lot more people are going to be thinking about it.
And I think that mindset kind of has to change. It's okay, like we'd because there's that fear that, oh my god, it would actually bring systems down, so we don't want to test it, or it'd bring activity or operations down. So that kind of got to change that mindset then. So if you could, as a kind of like roundup, or to just try and, because we've spoke about so many really cool parts of emulation, and I've certainly found it really interesting, and we've been wanting to have this conversation for quite some time. But if you could give kind of every security leader who's listening to this at the moment, like one piece of advice about validating their security posture, what would it be? What's their key takeaway?
Yeah, I guess I'd like everyone to go away and maybe think, if an attacker, real attacker, targeted you today, would you detect them?
That's a great question.
Could you respond effectively?
Yeah.
So if you can go away and answer that, and you can say yes, then I think brilliantly, that is great. I would say, I think you need to assume that if someone really is going to want to attack you, they're going to get in. They're going to get in. And so I really think you need to be starting to think about that question.
Almost that brutal honesty, haven't you, right?
Because I think it needs to move away from stopping the attacks
to stopping it,
to really thinking about, proving that you can detect it and proving that you can contain it, because if you can do that, then
you're already well ahead
you're
of
really,
your
peers. Exactly.
That's really cool. Honestly, we could just talk for another hour easily. But Warren, thanks. It's really always good to have someone from Omni and from the team to talk about some real life experiences. So thanks so much for carving time out of your busy schedule today.
No problem.
And talking about the listeners. I hope I certainly found it really interesting. I hope you enjoyed it as well. So thanks again, Warren.
No worries. Welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.